So we are now at the Lindau meeting for Nobel Prize laureates, and we have just met Professor Ed Fischer from the Department of Biochemistry at Washington University in Seattle, and he has promised to participate in a discussion, and perhaps then we start by wishing you welcome here. We are happy to see you here.
I'm delighted to be here.
And then the first question, how did you come into your research field, and what were your initial steps in the field that led you to your future career?
How I went into science, that came very early. When I was about 15 years old, I had read books on Louis Pasteur, and I decided I wanted to become a microbiologist.
Okay.
And I remember for my 16th birthday, I asked as a present for a microscope. And my brother, who was at the Polytechnical School in Zurich, bought in the second-hand store a beautiful, in fact, lights, the old lights microscope with a immersion objective. And I wanted to solve all the problems of the world. And this is how I went, in fact, into that field. And then when before I went to the university, I went to see the professor of microbiology. And he said, you know, there's no money in microbiology. If you want to become a microbiologist, you have to get a diploma of something. Pharmacy or chemistry. Pharmacy didn't interest me, so I went into chemistry, and this is how I ended up.
And then you finally came into the Nobel Prize laureate field, and you did this 1992 in physiology or medicine for reversible protein phosphorylation. Right. And how did that field start?
Came as a big surprise. In fact, I got a phone call in the middle of the night. My wife wasn't, she was a little bit ill, so she was sleeping in another room, and the phone rang, and I grabbed it, and somebody said, Dr. Fischer. And the first idea is somebody wants to sell me a new roof on the house. I say, yes. He says, are you Dr. Fischer from the University of Washington? I said, yes. I said, why does he? And he said, congratulations, you just got the Nobel Prize. And it had no reality. I said, I don't believe it. He said, oh, yes, believe it. You and Dr. Krebs are sharing. And the moment he mentioned Ed Krebs's name, since we have been working together for 40 years, it put everything in the right ballpark. So that woke me up. Okay. And I put the light on, and it was 3:45 in the morning. It was CBS, New York.
Okay. That's the usual time, because there is a time difference, and this time difference from the decision to reaching west coast of US makes that early in the morning for you. But I meant, how did you come into exactly that field? Because it must have been a long story before that too.
It came from the fact that Ed Krebs, my colleague, had been working with Carl Corey, the Coreys in St. Louis, on phosphorylase, muscle. We in Geneva, my mentor was Kurt Meyer, and we had been working on potato phosphorylase. And the muscle enzyme is activated, as you well know, by a compound called AMP, adenylate acid, but not the potato one. So the Coreys thought it was a form of coenzyme, and I thought it can't be, because coenzyme are preserved through evolution, as you know better than anybody else. So we decided, let's investigate the system. And we started working. We thought we would be working for a few months on that. And very rapidly we found that the enzyme was activated by a totally different mechanism. And that's how we entered the field of phosphorylation.
And then you had a long series of further discoveries. Would you like to describe some of them you think are crucial?
Well, yes, perhaps, well, that was the first, that the protein could be activated and inhibited by phosphorylation, dephosphorylation. And then when we worked in crude muscle extract, there was an absolute requirement for calcium. But when we purified the enzyme, there was no involvement of calcium. And the question is, why do we need calcium in the crude extract? There were a lot of our enzyme, phosphorylase, there was a lot of magnesium ATP required. Why do we need calcium? And the only possibility is that the enzyme, we knew it had to be an enzymatic reaction. We knew it had to be what we call a kinase. The only possibility was that the kinase also existed in inactive and active form, and calcium was involved with that. And that turned out to be correct. Yeah. So that was the beginning of a cascade system. Activation of an enzyme that activates another enzyme that breaks down glycogen.
How do you feel now with something like 10% or whatever of all proteins being regulated by phosphorylation? It must be a wonderful feeling to have found this first and then know that everything depends on it.
Well, this is really serendipity, where you know where you start in research and you never know where you will end up. Yeah. You know, this is the beauty of basic research. And yes, now there's an explosion of kinases. And then the very, very big development in the field was the discovery just 20 years ago that a very important carcinogenic virus, Rous sarcoma virus, brings about tyrosine phosphorylation and the involvement of tyrosine phosphorylation in transformation and oncogenesis. And that the field developed, at first people thought, oh, it's a nice system, but, they are working on it, why? Yeah. And then when we found that calcium was involved, that got all the muscle physiologists interested because muscle contraction is triggered. And then it was found that nerve conduction, phosphorylation, that got all the neurologists excited. And then when it was found that transformation is brought about by tyrosine, so that was the explosion.
You feel that you have the capacity to follow all the different fields, or?
No, absolutely not. This is the importance of going to meetings, the importance of friends who call you. I'm retired now since, in fact, it's 7 years, but I closed my laboratory about 3 years ago. And I'm delighted I have. Because now I can read science for the beauty of it. Yeah. Yeah. Without thinking, oh, I have to tell Al he should do that. I have to remember that. Now I just read science and follow science for the pleasure of it. That's very good.
This matter with sociology of science, did the Nobel Prize change your life? Did you come into lots of committees? You got other commitments, or?
In many little ways, nice ways. I certainly can't bitch about it. Yeah. It has been an extraordinary experience, not only for me, but we have always been very, very close friends with Ed Krebs. But more than that, the two families were in Stockholm. They have become close friends. Within my family, they have become much closer. We are bound by this sort of a confrérie, a brotherhood, if you want. And so it has been really an extraordinary experience. A little bit disturbing, too. Disturbing because, and I was wondering why. You wonder, why were we selected? And somebody spoke about that. Science, you never do science alone. You do science with collaborators. The whole field is carried out by many, many groups. We would have never been able to do what we did without a whole slew of very, very bright collaborators. And so there is a difference between the Nobel Prize, for instance, and a gold medal in the Olympic Games. For the Olympics, you train like crazy for several years with one goal in mind. You compete, you beat all the other guys, and by golly, when they give you the gold medal, you know why you got it. Not with a Nobel Prize.
But in some cases, perhaps it may be different to different fields. How much do you rate? I mean, first there is experience. Science has long tradition and lots of previous results, and then you work hard and you have lots of collaborators. But you also need that push, the creative environment and the creative realization of yourself. How do you think first? What did you consider about that in your case, and how can we promote it in general?
Well, for me, I can tell you, it was the love of science.
Yeah.
Really that. Yeah. The enormous pleasure of working in a lab, never knowing what you will get, getting extraordinary results that will prove wrong within a week, others that hold, and this daily, it's like reading a detective book where you try to follow some clues and try to build a story. I like the approach of making hypotheses and then either trying to destroy them or to prove them and go this way. I like this approach.
I like your lecture. There was an MPSA meeting in Seattle, and I was listening to you then before you got the prize, and I liked your models and theories already there, so that was great. It must be great fun for you.
It has been. So if I had to do it again, which I have no desire whatsoever, I'm very happy of what I have done. I feel very, very lucky in what I have done. I wouldn't do it differently.
No. And but most people have something they might wish to have changed. Anything you would have changed? Nothing.
No, when I went into science, I was at the conservatory in Toulouse. I was playing the piano, and maybe there was some hesitation whether or not I should go into music. I would have never been able to become a concert pianist. For that, you have to be a virtuoso at age 12, like tennis players. And I was not. I didn't have the virtue. But I would have probably become a conductor. I like music more than piano. But I don't know. I felt that music, I should keep that for the garden, for the pleasure of it.
Do you see any connection between the music and science? Because you had this connection. The previous person I interviewed here had the same, Manfred Eigen, and my mentor, Hugo Tyrell, had the same.
Yes, a good friend.
Do you see any reason for this?
I don't know. I did a lot of piano violin with Jerry Edelman, who's a very good violinist, and I love chamber music. I love to accompany people who sing, leader. But it sounded gross to me to make a living out of music. Have music as something very that you don't touch. So,
if we should switch to support a little, how do you see the matter of present-day support of science and the discussion that we just had in the lecture room?
Well, I have the same worries that were expressed. The fact that now more and more you go towards targeted research. There's nothing basically wrong in targeted research. In fact, many fundamental discoveries came through applied research, as exemplified, for instance, by the work of Louis Pasteur. But nothing wrong as long as all the money doesn't go towards targeted research. And unfortunately, many administrations have this erroneous feeling that you can solve a problem by throwing millions of dollars at it. They don't understand what is creativity in science. They don't understand that so many discoveries come from serendipity. Mendel didn't know that he would find the laws of classical genetics by trying to solve why peas would grow white or pink or another or Huygens, who was interested simply in looking at the properties of electrons bouncing on a cathode. Yeah. He didn't know he would maybe the largest discovery ever made in the field of medicine. Now, if either Mendel or Röntgen would have applied to, let's say, an NIH, if it existed at that time, there's not a chance in a million that their work would have been approved. So
then perhaps we can end up with a question about the future. I guess you must have got it several times before. Now you have had a successful scientific life with full of science for 50 years or more. If you now go 100 years ahead, what would you think happen, and which of the present day questions are not solved or are all solved, or difficult question?
If you ask me what percentage, I would say 0.0000, etc. There are tremendous problems that would have to be solved. To predict, even in 10 years, you cannot do that. As a friend of mine once said, it's like asking a general of cavalry in 1880 to plan for World War III. You see, he would tell you, give me 10,000 cavaliers and I'll protect Washington. So you cannot predict. You cannot guess what you cannot imagine. But as the big, I think, problems that will be solved rapidly is genetic therapy. Therapeutics, because we begin to understand a little bit the regulation of genes. There are tremendous problems, and to say, oh, we'll solve that in 10 years, it's nonsense. I don't know when, but it will. I'm certain we'll be able to regenerate nerves. And when nerves are cut, I'm sure that we'll be able to grow stem cells in all cases of aplastic anemias and things like that, replace that. So many therapeutic problems will be solved. In my field, which is cell signaling, there are many pathways. We begin to know those pathways. We know all the enzymes that are involved, but enzymes are words. We know bits and pieces of phrases, but we don't know the language a cell has to speak among pathways to coordinate all those reactions. We don't know that language. More importantly, we don't know the language that the cell has to speak with another cell to coordinate the development of multicellular organisms, where messages have to be sent back and forth from one cell to the other. And this communication has been crucial to the establishment of the very complex networks of communication we have in embryonic morphogenesis, in the immune system, in the brain, where you have some more than 1,000 million cells speaking with one another through something like 10 million billion synapses, ultimately leading to the generation of thought, memory, consciousness. That's one of the huge challenges that faces the biologist.
I think you gave a very good answer to this difficult question, and you did it so well, you get another difficult question after all. And that is, there are many ways of treatment. One is a genetic therapy for the future, like you just said. There is also transplantation. I was recently at a lecture where we were told all the benefits from transplantation. And a third is the drug treatments, like using inhibitors and receptor agonists and so on. How do you see the future between these three fields? You think we will be soon overtaken with the genetic therapy, or soon overtaken with transplantation?
I don't think so. I think we developed all three, and you'll use the one which is the more advanced at one particular time and then taken over. What is remarkable now is that we begin to understand some of the mechanisms that control each of these. For drugs, we begin to know how to model a drug, so the opportunity, the potential for advances in those three fields is immense. I think that the young people today have a marvelous future ahead of them in those fields.
That's again a very good answer, and also a very good end, because you give the positive view for the future. So I think we should thank you very much for coming here, and this is then the end here in Lindau with this discussion. Thank you.
Hans, my pleasure.